Ladies and gentlemen, while you were sleeping, I was not. And because I did not sleep, I can now tell you that America has successfully extracted, exfiltrated, and rescued its second F-15 pilot. Now you will ask, why must the rescue always happen at night while we are sleeping? It is because, particularly for the Americans, they have an advantage for such operations in the night. That was why all through the day of Saturday, they did not make an attempt to rescue the pilot. They waited until it was dark and then they mounted the rescue operation. Why are the Americans advantaged in the night? It is because number one, vision, night goggles. The Americans are particularly kitted extensively with infrared night vision goggles, while the Iranians don't have anything like that. Which means during the day, the Americans can see and the Iranians can see. So the Americans are not conferred the strategic advantage. But the moment it is night time and night falls, the Americans can see, but the Iranians cannot see. That is why the Americans always make a play for such rescue missions in the night under the cover of darkness. The Iranians also, as in the Americans also had a particular advantage that the Iranians did not have, and that is that the beeping beacon that the F-15 fighter pilot held. You see, that beacon will keep transmitting at all times, at least the approximate location of the American fighter jet to the Americans. Not just the folks who have actually come to do the rescuing, but even as far as the US White House situation room. So broadly, they knew where exactly the fighter jet pilot was at any time. See, what the problem was, it was actually going in to extract him. However, the Iranians had a massive disadvantage in that area. And that disadvantage is because the Iranians were essentially searching for a needle that they could not even identify in a proverbial haystack. Why? Because it's a massive land area here, particularly complicated complicated by mountains, by valleys, by jagged terrain, by ravines, by valleys and trees and all sorts. So the Iranians were essentially hunting, for a soldier they particularly did not know, with no particular technological advantage. So how exactly did the battle, so to say, for the soul of the American F-15 fighter pilot go in the midnight while you guys were asleep? But I woke up because of you. Circa 2 a.m., I opened my eyes and I picked up my phone. What exactly is happening in the war theater in Iran at this time? And I discovered that there was a massive firefight. The Americans came for the rescue mission with everything they could bring. They brought fighter jets. They brought Black Hawks, Apache helicopters. They came with A-10 Warthogs. They even came with refueling planes. This time around C-130s, all because of one single F-15 fighter jet pilot. So how did it go? By then, the Iranians had gotten better as against yesterday night. How did they get better? All those civilians, all those tribesmen that were carrying ding guns and hunting guns yesterday, as in yesterday night, you remember they pushed them back. They said, "This is not your fight. Let the professionals do the job. Let the heliborne guys, let the airborne troops, let the commandos, let the Iranian Marines, equivalents do the job." So there was actually a traffic jam. All those civilian tribesmen bearing guns wanted to come in to help them. No, don't help us this time. So it was the professionals that did the job this time. Second, those professionals also came with manpads. Do you know what I call manpads? Manpads are essentially shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile systems. Anti-air defense systems are usually mounted, either mounted on ground or mounted on trucks. However, there is a version of anti-aircraft systems that are mounted by the shoulder, carried essentially in equivalent of backpacks by individuals. So you see, manpads are particularly dangerous. They are particularly risky for fighter jet pilots because they are by far more difficult to see on ground from air compared to truck mounted or ground mounted anti-aircraft systems. So the Iranian commandos came in with manpads this time and the hunting started. So the Americans actually had to come down. They had to descend to ground to take their man. That was where the massive fighting began. There was a lot of fire here and there. The American Black Hawk helicopters that came to exfiltrate the F-15 fighter jet pilots suffered a lot of fire from the Iranians. So much so that the American troops in those Black Hawk helicopters actually took quite some injury. Again, two C-130 refueling planes were eventually left in Iranian territory. Why were they left in the Iranian territory? The Iranians insisted that they shot one down, while the Americans insisted that for the two fighter jets, they got stuck on the grounds of Iranian territory, and instead of allowing the Iranians to take the C-130s intact, what they did instead was that they blew up the two planes. So that was the Iranian narrative as against the American narrative. But in both instances, what is true is that as we speak, two C-130 American refueling planes are burning on Iranian territory as we speak. Now, at the end of the whole show, the Americans were able to exfiltrate their F-15 fighter pilot, and then Fox News actually reported that there is an indication that the pilot may have sustained quite extensive injuries. Why did Fox News say so? That correspondent said so because instead of proceeding proceeding immediately to the American German military hospital in Germany for treatment, it's like that pilot is currently being sustained in the Middle East. Probably because the injury he may have experienced may have been extensive, and he may not be fit for travel immediately to Germany. What are the lessons from this micro battle, so to say, like I always say? The first lesson I could pick from that is that the pilot is more important than the plane. Why? Because for a single pilot, or I would say for two pilots, look at the military gear. Look at the area military gear America committed to trying to exfiltrate that pilot. And look at what they were ready to lose and actually eventually lost simply because of two fighter jet pilots. Let me count for you. The F-15 itself was lost yesterday night, on a Friday night. Number two, an A-10 Warthog was lost. That is number two. Three, two Apache helicopters took fire. That is three. And then two C-130 refueling planes were lost completely to the Americans. All because of two American fighter jet pilots. What does that mean? That means that America may actually be ready to commit and to lose, even by a far higher, you understand, jets and the aerial fighting gear, just because they need to save their pilots. And that is also because if Iranian happen to capture one or more of those fighter jet pilots, one, it will have given Iran a massive propaganda victory. It will simply take him or her to state TV and beam to the whole world. We have an American on our hands. Two, it will give the Iranians a massive opportunity to demand a lot to ransom that American pilot, a price the Americans are not ready to pay. One of the stories they were flinging all over Telegram was that some people were suggesting that if they capture just one of those F-15 American pilots, that they would demand in return the release of no less than 10,000 Palestinian prisoners from the gulags, from the jails of the Israelis. Look at how hefty the price, at least that is being suggested, is. That is another lesson. The third lesson we need to learn, you understand, is that things do not particularly bode well for the Americans if they come in for a ground assault into Iran. For just two American fighter jets, look at how much gear they lost. That is one. Two, look at how many hundreds of experts, how many hundreds of American military experts they had to commit to the fight, to the battle, to extract one single American fighter jet pilot or two. Now, imagine what will happen if America commits thousands or probably even millions of troops to try to capture Iran. It will be essentially a classic bedlam. What I called hula baloo in my previous video. I hope you have learned from this particular episode. So when we can rest this story, maybe until any such scenario happens, we can move to other matters at this time. Thank you for joining me. Again, don't forget to like, to comment, to share, to broadcast, so to subscribe, and please keep following me. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.